In the months that followed Mogo's destruction, enough of the planet survived that the largest chunks of debris began to reform. John Stewart was sent by the Guardians to investigate, and he worked with a woman named Fatality to ensure that Mogo was returned to life. The greatest Green Lantern had somehow managed to survive, and began to reform himself, which is fortunate because he would be needed now more than ever. For on Oa, the Guardians of the Universe, that Mogo once so faithfully served, had begun to change. They had purged all emotion from themselves and grew impatient with the various life forms in the universe that had not been following their commands. Determined that free will was the reason for this, they agreed to eradicate every trace of it in the universe. The Green Lanterns had failed just as the Manhunters before them. It was time for the Guardians to deploy a third army. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out part 2 of my origins and bio for Mogo. This was a fun character to look at, and I'm really glad I had a chance to make a video or two about this character. Out of all the Green Lanterns, and I did have a lot of choices in the possible pool of characters from which I could do an origins and bio on for Green Lanterns, Mogo was a pretty easy choice for me. I really like this character, and setting aside the human Green Lanterns, who have a lot of fun, but we've already done a lot of videos on at this point, Mogo is just about one of my favorite Green Lantern characters there is. Out of all the origins and bios of this little mini-series we're doing, this is the character I was looking forward to the most, and he's just so damn interesting. Different compared to every other Green Lantern character we've seen so far, and a really fun choice overall in terms of making the Green Lanterns more than just humanoids being space police. Green Lanterns can be a lot of different things. That's actually something that Grant Morrison's doing really well in his current take on Green Lantern in the series The Green Lantern, as he explores different Green Lanterns of different forms and shapes along the lines of Mogo, but not actually Mogo. That series I've been enjoying thus far, but we're going to be focusing on the story of Mogo and the stories leading up to Grant Morrison taking over as lead writer for Green Lantern. And looking over all of it, I do have to say I really like Mogo's character and think that he's a fun addition to the Corps. He's absolutely one of my favorite characters, and if you want to read more about him, you can check out a recommended reading list that we've provided in the video description. We've actually been doing that for all the Green Lantern characters. You can also find a link to our Patreon page there, and that's an easy way to support us making more videos along these lines, or just in general. Patrons also have a stronger say in the kind of videos we make. We get hundreds of requests, and it'll be a long time before I ever make my way through my list of those. So patrons have a way of sort of shortcutting that list and making sure their videos and their ideas get made first. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel if you want to see more comic book based content. And enjoy the rest of my video on the origins and bio of Mogo. The Third Army was created to assimilate all life in the universe and place that life firmly in the Guardians' complete control. Free will would be erased entirely, while innocent beings would be rapidly converted into more troops for the Guardians. Mogo was an early target of the Third Army, as, thanks to his tremendous size, he would have been assimilated into legions of troops for this sinister new organization. The planet was able to detect the nature of this attack just as Mogo finally finished reforming, and Mogo used his powers to completely wipe out those sent to destroy him. Things only got worse when the Guardians inadvertently unleashed a powerful being called Volthoom. Mogo was instrumental in protecting other Green Lanterns during a battle around Oa, and training them in the hopes that they might better prepare themselves against Volthoom. Eventually this being was destroyed, while all but 2 of the Guardians were brutally slaughtered by Sinestro and Parallax. With their leadership thoroughly dismantled and Oa later demolished by a being called Relic, the Green Lanterns were left in disarray, at their lowest point since they were practically annihilated. Senior members of the Corps were forced to take over a leadership role in the organization, as it nearly fractured in two over differing philosophies with regards for what direction would be best for the rapidly collapsing organization. arguing with each other over how best to use the increasingly limited powers and resources of the Green Lantern Corps. Mogo found himself with a new ring of debris made out of what remained of Oa in orbit around him, and, in a bid to save the Corps from once again being destroyed, the living planet agreed to become the permanent new home for the Green Lanterns as they went through this period of upheaval and conflict. Mogo was thus developed with infrastructure during this time. He worked with John Stewart to create what was practically a new city for the Green Lanterns to live in. They included facilities that would house prisoners, the central green power battery from which all Green Lanterns could draw power, a medical unit, massive archives to store all data about the known universe and its history, and a number of other key buildings that would allow the Green Lanterns to effectively operate as peacekeepers. His surface became highly trafficked by the Green Lanterns and their allies on a regular basis. It also appears that by this point, the Green Lantern rings were altered to seek out hosts on their own, since later events would suggest Mogo was no longer directly involved with this process. The Green Lanterns came to enjoy a number of distinct advantages to Mogo being their headquarters. The entire planet could easily and safely travel from system to system, giving the Corps massive advantages when it came to mobility, deployment, and self-defense. A group of new Guardians of the Universe were discovered during the disastrous encounter with Relic, ones that had not gone in the direction of their fallen brethren, so they were given a new special open-air chamber on Mogo where they could meet and offer guidance to the Green Lanterns. They would also later be given a similar council room used by their predecessors on Oa. The sentient planet also began growing closer with another being who had taken up residence on its surface, Saint Walker, the last remaining Blue Lantern, who represented the powers of hope. Saint Walker and Mogo quickly became friends, as the sentient planet was able to help the Blue Lantern deal with the entire loss of his core at the hands of Relic, while they both shared a certain attitude when it came to the value of hope. Mogo remained one of the most powerful assets within the ranks of the Green Lantern Corps. At one point, he was able to bring in a rogue Violet Lantern, who uses the powers of love, by altering his gravity well to shake an entire planet that he was orbiting, forcing the alien woman and her army of followers to immediately surrender rather than risk being completely wiped out by this living planet. Shortly after this, thanks to the manipulation of aliens called the Duran, Mogo was laid under siege by a fleet of various alien ships, and Duran posing as Green Lanterns. Hal Jordan and a large group of Green Lanterns were able to drive them off. Mogo worked with the rest of the Green Lanterns in confronting the Duran over this, and the living planet used a piece of Oan debris orbiting him to launch an asteroid as a massive, deadly projectile against this enemy. Not long after this, Mogo nearly died again when a number of new gods took an interest in using the power rings of the emotional spectrum for their own purposes. The new gods Orion and Metron attacked Mogo and stole his power ring. Several Green Lanterns were killed in the struggle to get it back and save the sentient planet, much to Mogo's gratitude. However, the victory against the new gods required making a hole in the source wall, a barrier that envelops and protects the entire universe. Because of this, Krona, Mogo, and all other active Green Lanterns were pulled far into the past, into the universe that came before this one, the original home of Relic. Stranded over a doomed universe which was fighting over the last scraps of energy available, the Green Lanterns were forced to work with Relic and Krona to survive the experience, and save Mogo from being harvested for his formidable willpower by pirates who had come to rely on emotional energy to survive in this dying universe. To save himself, Mogo used the emotional energy of the pirates from all domains of the spectrum of light to force them off his surface. The Green Lanterns were left alone and isolated in darkness and the twilight moments of this universe, when Mogo was then approached by a large object, bigger than himself, another sentient planet called Perduron. This being, who did not seem to get along with Mogo, housed the last city of the old universe, protected by massive, seemingly benevolent guardians. The Green Lanterns were welcomed by this city, and they formed an alliance with them in the hopes that they could all find an escape from this universe before it collapsed completely, a moment that seemed to be rapidly approaching. Their task proved difficult, though. Many denizens of Perduron were growing desperate, while Mogo was forced to be left only loosely protected from them, while Green Lanterns were dispatched into the void of an all but empty universe in the hopes of finding an escape. Mogo was a useful beacon for the Lanterns to return home. When it turned out that the Guardians of Perduron were actually two gruesome monsters called the Blackest Knights, apparently this universe's version of the Black Lanterns, Mogo hit them with the full force of his power to reveal their deception. These beings were intent on devouring the last scraps of life remaining in the universe, but were foiled by the combined efforts of the Green Lantern Corps. The Green Lanterns managed to defeat these knights, transfer the last city onto Mogo, and travel into a tear in space, returning home. Perduron, much larger than Mogo, was unable to go with them, and was left behind with the Blackest Knights. The rest found themselves home in a universe that had begun to move on without them. Mogo agreed to remain the home of the Green Lanterns, and for a brief time, the Yellow Lanterns as well, when the Green Lanterns and Sinestro Corps formed an alliance together. A yellow central power battery was set up on Mogo beside his green battery, though this was later dismantled when the alliance collapsed a short time later. Some of Mogo's old inhabitants, namely the Guardians and St. Walker, found their way back home and resumed living on Mogo's surface. Through ups and downs, Mogo became the host to a number of adventures for the Green Lanterns. Though now housing more sentient beings than ever before, the planet became much more passive throughout these events as compared to earlier, likely out of concern for their safety. A good example of this was when Mogo was invaded by powerful beings immune to the energies of light. Mogo did not need to directly intervene, as John Stewart and the other Lanterns were able to defend him with conventional weaponry, while Hal Jordan destroyed the army entirely by taking out their leader. Similarly, when Mogo was the site of a battle against a rival police force that used lethal violence in taking down criminals called the Dark Stars, it was John Stewart, the Green Lanterns, and their allies that were able to defeat the entire organization without taking a single life. Mogo didn't have to involve himself whatsoever, likely out of concern for those living on his surface, but also because the Green Lanterns were now under solid and effective leadership. More recently, Mogo was plagued with violent storms that destroyed many of the buildings that housed the Green Lanterns, which was alarming since Mogo normally has complete control over his climate. This was due to the meddling of a villain called Cyborg Superman, and his allies, a group known as the Ravagers. However, the Corps, undeterred as always, defeated these villains and once again saved the day. However, rather than rebuild the facilities on Mogo, it appears that the Guardians opted instead to create a new version of Oa and re-establish it as headquarters to the Green Lanterns. Though no longer the headquarters to the Corps, Mogo remains an honored member and continues to patrol space, protecting the less fortunate. Alternate versions of Mogo exist across the multiverse, more or less the same as their mainstream counterpart. One version of note was used to house a number of xenomorphs who had been captured by Hal Jordan. Since this version of Mogo was empty at the time, he was a nice solution for keeping these creatures contained without having to slaughter them, as Hal Jordan viewed them as mindless animals simply acting on their instincts, not deserving of death or imprisonment in spite of the danger they posed. Years later, when the Green Lanterns were vanquished, and Kyle Rayner left the sole survivor, Kyle was contacted by a number of Green Lanterns who knew about the situation on Mogo. They had heard of a ship that crashed on the planet and were concerned about what happened to the crew. Kyle went with them to Mogo, which had become host to a xenomorph nest. They found a number of survivors, but Kyle lost his ring in the nest, and just barely managed to retrieve it and escape Mogo with a handful of survivors, though many were killed throughout the journey. The sentient planet in this universe, now dormant like he had become with the fall of the Green Lanterns in the main universe, had effectively become a death trap for smaller life forms. In another world, where Superman became a corrupt dictator on Earth, Mogo was part of a direct attack with the other Green Lanterns against Superman and his forces. The planet unleashed his full power during this battle, wiping out most of this universe's Sinestro Corps in a single, massive attack. However, the Green Lanterns were ultimately defeated, and Mogo was slaughtered by Superman after the Kryptonian was able to forcibly push the planet into Earth's sun.